Helen Stubbings from Hugs and Kisses, back again to show you the next step in my applique process. Today we're actually going to be doing the stitching down, so that's the blind applique stitch by hand to stitch our prepared pieces onto the background fabric. So I'll talk about what I use to stitch down. First of all, I use an applique needle. Now I package them with the name applique needle so that there's no confusion on which needle to use. I like to use a short strong applique needle with a large eye. A lot of people use a long very fine milliner needle, but they have a very small eye, and I found when I'm teaching that the biggest problem people have is threading that needle. So these have a larger eye, and because they're shorter they're stronger and they don't tend to bend. I personally can't use a bent needle, so once it bends and it's got a curve in it, then I need to throw it out and start again. So this is an applique needle. It's still nice and fine and gives you a lovely fine applique stitch, and it's still great for English paper piecing as well. Now today I would normally use a blending thread, and I just used a fine lightweight polyester thread. Some people like to use silk for applique and others like to be traditional and use a fine cotton. I use a nice strong fine polyester. They're sold in, can be bought in these little bobbins, or they can be bought in a set like this, which is great for travelling, a little bit of each colour. Or in reels for your sewing machine, or cones, all sorts of options. A blending thread is great. This one is called a champagne, and it works well for all these pinky sort of browny type fabrics. Sometimes just a set of neutrals, so a grey, a cream, a white. This one and a sagey green is all you need to cover most fabrics, and a red. I do use a red for red fabrics. Okay. Threading your needle, as I said, we have a nice large eye, but there is a method. Instead of threading the needle like this, I do what is called needling the thread. So I pull that thread back between my thumb and finger. I watch where it goes, but I pinch it close so I can't see it any longer. Okay, pinch it close. I look at the eye of my needle, make sure it's up the right way, and I simply push it through onto the thread. So the thread has no choice but to go through that eye of the needle. Then we start with a knot. As you can see, I have a black thread, and I'm just using that today so that you can see my stitch a little better, and then I will pull it out and do it with the blending thread. So we've started with a knot. I'll show you that knot again if you've not seen it before. Putting the end of the thread between my thumb and finger, and it's running along the needle so that I've got a circle, a closed circle. 3 wraps around the needle. Pull those wraps between your thumb and finger and simply slide them down to the end of the thread, and you'll have a knot there every time. Okay, we bring the needle up from the back and just catch the edge 2 threads of your applique piece. Okay, it should just be the fold that's gone around the edge of your paper. 1 thread's not enough, it'll just pull the thread out of the weave of the fabric, but 2. And just see how I'm holding it and using my thumbnail to hold everything nice and tightly in place, so it's not flopping around. When I bring my needle up, it's holding it firmly there rather than it flopping around like that as I'm trying to pinch my little piece of fabric. I'm going to take it back down into the same hole, but just through the background fabric. So it's straight up and straight down, and then move along about 1/8 of an inch and catch the edge of the applique piece a little further along. Straight down into the same hole, but I'm just tucking my needle in underneath the applique piece just through the background fabric. Moving along. When you bring the thread through, just give it a little tug, and then the tiniest bit of thread that is on the top, because remember you've come straight up and straight down in the same hole, give it a little tug and you're going to sink that tiny stitch into the weave of that fabric. So even if your thread is not a good blend or a perfect match, you should barely see that stitch anyway. As you can see, I'm using a black thread on a soft pinky apricot-y colour, and you can barely see it. So you're just working your way around catching the edge, straight back down and into the next spot. So on the front, the thread is going straight up and down. On the back, that is where all the movement of thread is, around here. Okay, it should actually look like a back stitch if you've hit the same hole, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same hole, just thereabouts. Just make sure you're just going straight up and down and not moving along on the front. Move the work as you go. Now I work from right to left, and I always work towards the applique piece. I have seen other people try and work this way into the applique piece, and I just don't think you have the same control to pick up just those very two edge threads. This way we can hold everything in place and make sure that stitch goes exactly where we want it. If you happen to have any points on your curve that are still concerning you, then just use that tip of the needle to pull them in and smooth them out just before you get to that point to stitch it. So you do have one last chance to smooth out any of those imperfections in your gluing. But once you've got the hang of the gluing, you'll find that you'll get it fairly perfect in that step of the process, and stitching it down is just a thoughtless, mindless, enjoyable process. All the work's been done in the gluing. No more do we have to painstakingly use that tip of the needle to sweep under the seam allowance as we did for needle turn after every 2 or 3 stitches. It's a much quicker process now that we've pre-glued it all. Okay, so if we can get a close shot at that, and you remember I used a black thread, not quite to the end, but that's enough to show you, and you can barely see those little stitches around the edge. Okay, I've come to the end of my shape, and I'm going to come through to the back and knot it off. I just make a loop, take a stitch through that loop, I do it twice to form a knot, and then we just trim. And I'll just take off my second knot there that I showed you when I was demonstrating the knot. And there's our first piece appliqued into place. Of course